Is it officially time to be worried about Travis Kelce? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can check her out on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her work at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. And as always, it's a Panic Meter Monday here in the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Let's start, Kate, with Travis Kelce, who big game for the Chiefs. They had to win to make sure they won the division. And Travis Kelce goes 3 for 16 on 4 targets, basically non-existent. Are you officially starting to worry about Travis Kelce?
I am. I mean, this production isn't just bad, Marcus. It is like historically bad for Travis Kelce's career. He has had 13 games of 7 or fewer fantasy points dating back to 2018. 4 of them have come this season. 3 of them have occurred in the last 3 weeks. That's half PPR scoring. You do have to be concerned. Now, here's the thing, Marcus. I don't think Travis Kelce is fully healthy. I do not think that this is some Taylor Swift conspiracy, although, maybe he's realigned some of his priorities now that he's found the love of his life.
I'm not saying anything to upset Swifties. Swifties are brutal. Just
Swifties, you mean me. I am a Swiftie, but I'm also a Kelce, and I want to see him succeed on the football field. I don't think he's fully healthy, but here's the thing. He's not getting any younger, and you're already starting to see this offense gravitate toward Rashee Rice as their primary pass catcher. I want to know what do we think a Travis Kelce who is fully healthy actually looks like in 2024 and beyond? Is this a moment where you sell high because the asking price for Travis Kelce is still top tight end assets? Like you draft him as a top tight end, you have to trade top assets, top draft picks if you want to trade for him. What are we assuming the floor or in the ceiling looks like for Travis Kelce in 2024? I think that's the measuring stick that we need to be measuring against. That's what we should be measuring against.
I don't know. This one's really tough because I could see this playing out in several different ways. Like, okay, let's run through some scenarios. What if the Chiefs get bounced in round 1 of the playoffs? Do we think that Travis Kelce's going to hang him up and be done? Because I kind of don't. But if the Chiefs were to make it to the Super Bowl and would win another Super Bowl, I could see Travis Kelce retiring. He's already talked about considering retirement and all of that kind of stuff. I also wonder, like, how is his game going to age if he decides to play a little bit longer? And I think you're starting to see the dynasty community throw their hands up a little bit when it comes to Travis Kelce's value, because going into the month of December, he was being drafted as tight end 3 behind Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkins. Okay. Here's some recent trades from Dynasty League football, all within the last week for Travis Kelce. A 2025 second round pick and third round pick.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. Travis Kelce and Jerome Ford for Keenan Allen and George Kittle.
Neither of those are particularly appealing, but interesting to see the price.
Here's one from 3 weeks ago. And again, you just mentioned, here's the stats over the last 3 weeks. 5 for 28, 5 for 44, 3 for 16. So this is before that dry spell. Travis Kelce for Dalton Kincaid. I'd rather have Dalton Kincaid going forward. I think you would as well. And then Travis Kelce for Drake London.
That one's tough. because of the Arthur Smith effect. But I don't know how I feel about Travis Kelce right now. I think the notion that I'm deciding upon is that I do think it's time to move on from Travis Kelce. But I also I need to figure out the asking price. That's the question.
I have no idea. I just, after watching him play this year and knowing his age and all the stuff that he wants to do off the field, I kind of would put it at like 50-50 that he retires after the year. So if your dynasty leagues, you're still able to trade after your season is over, like trade during the playoffs. I know a second round pick feels pretty cheap. I probably wouldn't do it for a second round pick, just because if Kelce does come back for another year, that's way more valuable. But anything more than that, I'm sitting down and having a conversation with myself about this move.
I think that's fair. It's a sad state of affairs, Marcus.
Really quickly before we move on, just as we stand going into week 18, I'm going to read you all the tight ends that are going to be drafted, that are being drafted inside the top 10. You tell me how many you would have over Travis Kelce. You say stop when you think you'd insert Kelce. Okay. Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, Dalton Kincaid, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Kyle Pitts, Jake Ferguson. Yeah. Okay. So before Kyle Pitts.
Yes.
Okay. I agree with you. I as much as I love Kyle Pitts, I just don't know if it's ever happening.
I don't know if it's ever happening either, but now we've got reports that we might not actually have the Falcons moving on from Arthur Smith for God knows what reason. Yeah, those reports are enough to scare me into a Kelce tier break right there.
So frustrating. Travis Kelce, one of the weirdest dynasty assets out there right now, because you would think if he does play next year, we're going to rank him as a top 3 tight end all season long, but there's also a very good chance that he could retire or walk away after the season. So we shall see. Kate, let's talk about somebody on my favorite team, Tony Pollard, who may be the biggest bust in redraft leagues on players.
Maybe.
Well, I'm saying for guys that didn't get injured. Like if you spent a high pick on Joe Burrow or something like that, like, yeah,
there's no maybe about it, baby. It's Tony Pollard.
Okay, let's dive into Tony Pollard's dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the most fun that I've ever had playing DFS because there's so many different players and so many different stat projections to choose from. It's absolutely incredible. Plus, PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return for the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports streaming channel. Okay, let's talk about Tony Pollard, who I got to admit, I was completely wrong about Tony Pollard this year. I thought he was going to have a huge year. I thought he was, as the workhorse back in Dallas, I thought he was going to put up monster numbers. He's gotten all the work, has not been effective against the Lions. 16 carries for 49 yards, no touchdowns. He got 3 targets in the passing game, 1 catch for 0 yards. Okay, this is bad. It's really bad.
It's really bad. And to be fair, the Detroit Lions actually have a very stout rushing defense, but 17 rush attempts. Yeah, you wanted something a little bit better than that. Ironically, this game yielded his highest missed forced tackle rate of the entire season. All of that efficiency, at least he had a couple of missed forced tackles, which uh, to this point have been kind of absent from his game. But yeah, averaged 3.3 yards per carry in this outing. And Marcus, like I think the biggest tell for Tony Pollard is just that he looks different playing
He
football.
does.
He
Yeah.
looks less explosive. So I think this is really a kind of telling moment because he's about to hit free agency. And Marcus, I don't know that he's done enough to yield a high-end contract. I think he was kind of hoping with that franchise tag that would be a moment to bet on yourself, but it hasn't come to fruition. So not only do you have a running back who, at least for the time being, he is, in a situation where he's starting, but the future is very much uncertain here for Tony Pollard as he is, presumably heading into free agency. 26 years old, looks like he's kind of lost that element of explosion. So realistically, where do you see Tony Pollard 1 year from now? Because I have a hard time believing that he's going to yield top running back money in this
Great.
market. And if he doesn't, is he just going to fall down the pecking order? And like,
It's not
what does
great.
that mean? No, it's not great at all.
Kate, I've got no idea what Tony Pollard's market looks like. I can't imagine the Cowboys would even consider franchise tagging him again, which they did last year. I don't know if they should have done it last year, but like I'm gonna assume he's back on Dallas, but I'm gonna assume that they bring somebody else in to share some of this work because last year, this is what's so frustrating. In 16 games last year, he had 1,000 yards on 45 fewer touches. He had 4 more rushing touchdowns. He had 3 more receiving touchdowns. He was a much better runner and a much better receiver as a backup. Now you give him all this additional work, and he just doesn't look the same. Averaging 4.0 yards per carry this year. This one sucks. This one's really hard.
Yeah, just not as tough, not generating as many yards after contact either, which like again, that element of explosion just hasn't felt as fruitful here for Tony Pollard. Now, interesting that you say, obviously I'm going to trust you because you are the resident Cowboys expert, but I'm actually fascinated to hear that you could expect him back with the Dallas Cowboys next year. But again, I don't know that that's a good thing for his dynasty value because there's no way that the Cowboys could look at what they got out of Tony Pollard, especially considering how fruitful the offense has been, and say, you know what, we're satisfied with that. I think this is probably, if he returns to the Dallas Cowboys, I have to imagine that it is a relegated to a backup role, a cheap deal where he can be once again that
I agree.
The side piece rather than the main element.
Okay, it's going to be really interesting to see what the Cowboys do here because I think they're going to bring him back as I mentioned, but I do think they're going to draft somebody, and they really like Rico Dowdle. They drafted Deuce Vaughn. They've got this fullback Hunter Lipke that they like, but I envision them going out and drafting somebody pretty early, like second or third round, and I envision them maybe looking into the free agent market because you look at some of the running backs that are going to be available. Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, maybe even Nick Chubb. We'll see. I just wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys are aggressive going out and trying to find a running back to either pair with Tony Pollard or to eventually replace him. So his current value right now in Dynasty leagues is RB16, and I have no interest in paying that price at all. None.
No, it's more of a question of like, what is the upside, especially with that pricing and with that range, right? Like you're still paying, RB2 pricing for Tony Pollard. in that range, I'm typically looking for a shot at upside, a shot at a guy who maybe has a chance to either take over a backfield or is in a outstanding situation that could yield him an RB1 performance, right? That's the kind of upside that I usually chase in that RB2 range. And I don't see Tony Pollard holding that. And so especially right now, if I have Tony Pollard, I'll look to move on. As soon as my trading window maybe opens back up, if you are in a league that has a trade deadline, as soon as that trading deadline opens back up, I'm going to try to sell Tony Pollard for what I can get for him.
Now, there is a chance, I'm just going to put this out there, there's a chance that we get to the postseason and maybe Pollard has a really good game in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs and starts to look like this explosive player that we saw from last year. But the Cowboys are also really tight up against the cap, which I'm going to keep mentioning. They have Dak Prescott, whose contract expires after next year. CeeDee Lamb, who's going to be playing on the 5th-year option in 2024. Micah Parsons, eligible for a contract extension. The Oso Digizua, their star defensive tackle, eligible for a contract extension. They're going to be pinching pennies just to get by. And if they feel like, hey, we don't have to pay Tony Pollard $7 million, we can let him hit free agency, and we're going to just draft somebody instead, I worry about his value even more because Dallas is the one spot where he was going to get 18 to 20 touches every week. If he goes to, pick your team, let's say the Rams, who have always been really weird with running backs, they pay him $7 million to pair him with Kyren Williams. All of a sudden, you completely see his value fall off. So if possible, I think I'm going to try to trade Tony Pollard this offseason as soon as I can.
Especially if he has one of those boom games here in the Dallas postseason, that could be your prime opportunity.
Absolutely. And we know how people cover the Cowboys. We know that the Cowboys players get a lot of attention. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Again, we mentioned that RB16 price tag going into the month of December. He has a big game in round 1 against the Rams. All of a sudden, maybe he's back to being a top 12 dynasty running back, but I just don't trust him long-term at all. Okay, let's talk about the most interesting name on our Panic Meter Monday list, and that's Chris Olave, who had a fine season and another fine game on Sunday, but let's talk about his long-term prospects next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays that you can find some bets in the new Explore tab, or make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the easiest way to find popular parlays. You can also bet on the futures market. Like, I love the Steelers to make the playoffs this year. I think they're going to win against the Ravens. I think they're going to get some help this week as well. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make your first bet a layup with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. All right, Kate, closing out our Panic Meter Monday, I want to talk about Chris Olave, who you look at the stats, 1,000 yards, 4 touchdowns, got 150 something targets again this year. Had a fine day against Tampa Bay in week 17. I've got the numbers right here. It was 3 for 26. It's whatever. Well, what are your long-term thoughts on Olave?
The question about Chris Olave is not whether or not he is a good wide receiver. It's not whether or not he has volume or yardage. It's that he hasn't had those boom weeks that I think you would expect based on the volume, the quality of his play. It just doesn't feel like we have yet hit that ceiling for him in terms of fantasy scoring. Like, there's some sort of mismatch here. For that reason, I think I'm okay holding pat because I believe in the talent. I'm not as panicked as I think you might be on Chris Olave, and I think it's solely because of the fact that, okay, so the talent we're witnessing on the field, the quality of play that we are witnessing on the field, even the stats outside of like maybe the touchdown column, all of these marks, I'm still impressed with that. I do think that there has to be some sort of reckoning between his fantasy production and the quality of his play, right? And the talent. Like those three aspects have to come to a head.
He's so talented, but my issue with this Saints team is I just don't know if Derek Carr is the guy that's going to be able to get him have him have these boom weeks. Okay, some numbers for you. So he has 4 100-yard games this season. In those 4 100-yard games, 0 touchdowns. In the 4 games that he's scored a touchdown, he's gone over 50 yards with a touchdown once. So like you're just getting, even in the games where he's performing well, you're getting like 13 to 14 PPR points. And for a guy that's being drafted as wide receiver 9, like that's like wide receiver 3 numbers. And you're going to look at the end of the year numbers and it's 1,000 yards and whatever, but he's not actually helping you win anything.
I mean, you're 100% right. Now, the interesting thing for Chris Olave, like you look at the usage in the red zone, leads the team by a significant margin in terms of red zone targets. But once you get into the end zone, which are these very high value targets here in that offense, which I think this might be the reason for some of the like disappointments. Chris Olave, 10 end zone targets. You know who has the second most targets in the end zone for this New Orleans Saints offense? Michael Thomas.
That guy. I forgot about him.
Exactly. So like Michael Thomas has 3 fewer red zone targets than Chris Olave on the year. And he hasn't even been playing. So like, you know, you look at the sort of disparity there. Michael Thomas has played 4 fewer games than Chris Olave this year. Only has 3 fewer red zone targets. And you have Rashid Shaheed, 6 red zone or end zone targets. And I think the biggest sort of thing working out of his favor is the fact that, yeah, this team, once they get into the red zone and into the end zone, this is a team that kind of spreads the ball out. And
Taysom Hill gets every single touch.
Yeah, Taysom Hill's a pain in the booty, which we could save him for another show, Marcus. Yeah. But
can we have a show the most annoying fantasy players? Because Taysom Hill is one of them.
I definitely think that would be a really fun show. The players that just make you roll your eyes because they always seem to do something at the most inconvenient times and have those that helps nobody moment. Derek Carr, yeah, like I think all of the talent, Marcus, all of the opportunity he does, like he's got an elite target share, Marcus, 129 targets over 14 games. That's an elite target share. I think all of these things do need to come to a head at some point to the fact, like it's kind of like using air yards as a potential way of finding sleepers, right? Because you're like, well, at some point these air yards have to become realized and then we're gonna have the boom week. That's kind of how I feel like with Chris Olave, and maybe that's a weird metaphor. I hope everybody followed along with that.
Really quickly before we go, I'm gonna read you some of the names that are being drafted behind Chris Olave. Again, this is a little bit older ADP. It's going into the month of December, but I want your thoughts. Brandon Ayuk,
Chris Olave.
I'd rather have Ayuk. Devontae Smith,
Chris Olave.
I'd rather have Chris Olave. Stephon Diggs,
Chris Olave.
DK Metcalf.
I'll take DK Metcalf.
I would as well. Jordan Addison.
Chris Olave.
I agree. Puka.
Oh, okay.
That one's not
close. Me.
That's Puka for me.
Yeah, I think it's Puka. But that's.
I got one more for. Actually, I got 2 more for you. Zay Flowers.
Definitely Chris Olave.
DJ Moore.
Chris Olave.
I'd rather have DJ Moore.
See, yeah, I'm definitely less panicked on Chris Olave than you are. Which, Marcus, that means you better start shelling out any of your Chris Olave shares. What would you be willing to sell him for in your dynasty leagues right this moment?
A top 14 receiver. I maybe I'm scarred because I have Olave in almost every single one of my dynasty leagues. He was one of my main trade targets this year. I've got his jersey hanging up in my basement right now. And it's just like I'm watching these games and the talent's undeniable, but it's just like I don't love the role. They're not feeding him in the red zone, so there's just no red zone touches. And I just don't love this Saints outlook long term. So I'm a little spooked, to be honest with you.
You're spooked, but I am not. So trade me all of your Chris Olave and let's call it a day.
Perfect. All right. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. As always, you can go check out our show on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. And we will see you right back here tomorrow. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.